Hey everyone, I'm Jay and welcome to another video in a series that I'm calling Web Dev Basics. Alright, so I've been noticing that uh, I've got a couple of classes that I teach this specific topic on, and some of my students, more than I'd like anyway, right, a non-zero amount, have been quite confused about what is specifically the head and the header elements, but also the HTML element, the body element, and to some extent the main and the footer element. The head and the header, very confusing, understandable. The head, because of the head and the header, the additional difference between the head and the body and then where everything else goes does tend to get confusing as well, especially when we're thrown these things kind of all at once and we're still beginners, right? So I have an example here and I'm going to walk through it nice and slowly and go over the difference between all of these things: the HTML element, the head, the body, the header, the nav, the main, the footer, okay? What the difference between them is, where they belong in relation to each other, okay? So let's get started, okay? Very first one, the HTML element. This element is not really for us, it's not for the users, it's for the browsers, and it's to make all of our content basically XML compliant, right? Even though HTML5 doesn't strictly have to be XML compliant, there are some things in there that are kind of forced upon us. The HTML element is one of them. We want to wrap all of our content in this HTML element. And just like most of our elements, it's going to have an opening or a starting tag, and it's going to have a closing tag at the end. All of the HTML goes within the HTML element, right? Just think, it's the HTML element, all the HTML goes in there, all of it, okay? Don't put anything outside the HTML. The only thing that should ever be outside of it is the doc type, which tells us, hey, you've got an HTML file coming up, and then you have your HTML element, all right? Hopefully that one is nipped in the bud right there. Okay? Within the HTML element, their direct descendants, the very next two things that appear in the HTML element, there's only ever going to be these two things that are the immediate descendant of the HTML element, is the head and the body. And I know there's some confusion about the head versus the header. I will get to that. The head and the body. Okay, the head is the head of the HTML page, and pretty much all the information in there is, again, not for the user. This time it's for the browser itself. Okay, there's only one piece of information in here, two pieces of information in here that the user will directly see, and that is the title. The user will see that. It'll be in their tab. They'll see the title. And they'll also see the favorite icon, if you have one defined there. Most websites do, but it's not universal. Okay, so if you have a favorite icon, they'll see that in the tab. If you have a title, which you should always have a title, your title will be seen in the tab. Everything else is for the browser, and the user will see the results of that. We're defining a style sheet here, and the user will see the results of having a style sheet because we'll have style. But the user is not going to see the style sheet itself. Same thing with the character set. The user will see the results of having a proper character set, but the user won't see the actual character set. Okay? The title the user will see, the favorite icon the user will see. If there's some JavaScript in there, the user will see the results of that JavaScript, but not the JavaScript. So that's all the head of the head. The head contains, essentially, it's all metadata, okay? And there's actually a meta element that belongs in the head that always have to go in the head. You could have multiple meta elements. Okay, all these things go within the head. These links going to the style sheet and the favorite icon, those are not meta elements by name, but they are metadata, and the definition of metadata is data about data. So everything that's in the head is data about the page. It is not what makes the page. The page data itself is actually what's within the body below, which we'll get to. This, everything that's in the head, tells the browser how to display that data. So all of this actually is metadata. Of course, the title is not metadata. It's user metadata, sort of. And then the favorite icon. Those are the two exceptions. Everything else really is metadata. So the head and the body go at the same hierarchy level. Okay, they are direct descendants of the HTML element. Okay, the head, important to note, the head element, this is not the header of the page. No, this is not visible to the user at all. We're not talking about user content yet when we're in the head. Okay, so the head, this is the head of the page as far as the browser is concerned. And by the way, the head element was created decades before the header element, and so the names being very similar is just an unfortunate coincidence. For those of you who are confused by it, it is very unfortunate. For people like myself who have been using the head for many years and then the header came along, wasn't really a lot of confusion for me because I was wildly familiar with the head. I had been coding the head of my web pages for many years already. But for those of you who are just learning both of them at the same time, I can understand your confusion. But just know that they were created completely independently of each other. And the head is the head of the page itself for the browser, and the header, that is the header that we are going to display to the user. Okay? Now, before I continue on with the body, it's important to note that the body of the HTML page, this is the part that the user is going to see. Everything that's within the body. So all this other stuff, if you have a wrapper element like I do, that goes in there. The header, the nav, the main, the footer, all of that goes in the body. The body is what they see. The body makes the body. That's the meat and potatoes. That's the visible portion of the web page. So if you think of your HTML page as kind of a corporeal and a non-corporeal part of a being, the head is like the spirit of the page. Only the browser can see it. The users can't see it. The body is that visible part of the page that has that physicality that the user can see, the part that's actually displayed to them. Okay? So everything visible to the user goes in the body. Okay? Notable exception, only exception are the title and the favorite icon. Now, it's important to know that within the header, you're probably going to have an H1 element that is your page title. This is not the same page title that's in here, okay? And I've noted it with some text. The title that's in the head is actually a title element, and that one specifically defines what's written in that tab in your browser. The title that you may put in the header, and that's fully dependent on the layout and design of your page, but oftentimes we are going to put it in the header. We're going to have an H1, and it's going to have the title. That one's for the user. The user is going to actually read that on the page. It's the title of the page. It's going to say something like 25 things you didn't know about blank. Okay? That's the title the user is going to see. The two of them might be the same. You set them differently. One is for the tab, and one is going to be in the page. And it's probably going to be styled with some kind of CSS. That's the cool one. The one that goes in the tab on the top is just text. You don't get a chance to style that other than attach a favorite icon there as well. Okay, so the header element, this one, all these other elements, the header, the nav, the main, the footer, those are all div tags. They're all div elements that just have a specific name. It's really not much different than having a div with an ID of header. This is what we used to do for many years before the header element was invented and before it took over in popularity. We would just have a div ID header, and that would be the header. Another reason why I'm not confused by it, because I was using that for years before the header came around. Okay, so think of this header as a div with the ID of header. Okay, the header is a thing that you have to create. The head is a thing that definitely exists already, and it's not part of the content area. Okay, the body is the content area of the page. The nav, not a lot of confusion there that I'm noticing. That's the navigation. Okay, do note that the nav element, that's a div, just it's named the nav. Okay, and you still have to put a UL in it for your list of nav items. You can't just combine those things. Not happening. You have to put one inside the other. Absolutely have to. Okay. The main element, this is in my visual example right here. The header is gray. The main is white. And then the footer is gray. The main element, this is where we put all of the content. When somebody comes to your page, that's what they look for. Okay, they're probably not going to read the header. They've already seen it once on the home page because it's probably the same on every page, and they're going to skip right down to the main content. And then the footer, right? The footer, there's another part of confusion that I see a lot of. The footer goes in the body. There is a head and there is a body. There's not a footer outside the body. There's nothing outside the body after the body. Okay? The footer goes within the body. The body element is, my body element on this page is set to be background color of green. The body element is the entire visible screen to the user. Even more than the visible screen, because you have a long page, even what they can't see, they have to scroll to. That's all in the body. All of it is within the body. If you put something outside the body, just imagine you're putting it outside of the page, outside of the whole browser. That's what you should imagine. Don't put it outside the body. Right, so the footer goes in the body. It is the footer of that page that is within the body. Something I have here, I have a little comment for the ending of the page, because this div tag is just named div. Okay, the beginning div tag is called ID page. All right, it's very common that we'll have one or possibly multiple element layers in between the body and all the other content. And that is because, like I have in my example, the body's background color is green. All of that is green. But I also want something to define where all of this other content is within the body, and it doesn't go all the way to 100% of the width or the height. I want to have a little bit of high relief in there. And so we're going to put this element, I'm going to call it ID page. It's fairly common. It's not universal though. You can call it wrapper. That's also very common. Whatever you call it, everything else is going to go inside of it. Okay. You can write some CSS so that the header will get some code, the nav will get some code, the main will get some code, and the footer will get some code. You can achieve the same goal, but now I'm writing code 4 times when I could just put a page around it and write code once. Okay, so that's the main reason for that page, to create this page width. Okay, so hopefully that clears things up a bit. All right, the big thing that I'm seeing is confusion between the head and the header. And then also, some folks like to put the footer outside of the body. Don't put any user content outside the body. The user wants to look at all the body, nothing else. Okay, all that user content goes within the body, and all that browser content goes within the head. And don't forget these either. The character set might not look like much, and on your browser it probably doesn't even matter, but some of your visitors might have an issue if you don't define this. Okay. So I'm going to put a link to this CodePen. Right? Normally I use JS Fiddle. A little shout out to CodePen. I know some of you might be using CodePen. They are very similar, but they have their differences. I'm pretty partial to JS Fiddle. I've been using it for a while, but I am giving CodePen a try. All right, so I'll put a link to this example, and this one is in CodePen. And thanks for watching.